Sup, guys? I skipped the baseball card yesterday, and I'm doing it again tonight. I don't like this, skipping a full baseball card on a Friday, but I have to do it, man, because we have situations that look good to me, but then I look at the starting pitching matchup, and I'm like, I just can't do it. The starting pitching matchup is just in opposition to the situation. I just don't like that. Maybe I'm being too picky, but I kind of need those couple of things to line up a little bit, even though, yeah, we're overrating the starting pitching a little bit, but it doesn't mean nothing, especially when pitchers, they're going at least half the game still in most of these cases, even though they don't go as deep as they used to. Yesterday, unfortunately, I was right. Well, unfortunately, just that I didn't play them. I was right on the totals. The over in that Corbin Quantrill game, Washington, Colorado, that went over. The under in Houston, Baltimore got there as well, with Corbin Burns not pitching very well, continuing his struggles recently, but Spencer Arrighetti had a good game. He threw 6 shutout innings, a nice performance out of him, so he held up his end of the deal, and that game went under. The Mets beat San Diego, which that was a game where I said, like, I thought the Mets were in a tough travel spot, but the fact that they were starting a road trip does tend to be a positive. So there are a lot of conflicting things going on there. And Severino could have been in a letdown after a huge game, but facing the Padres is also a big game. And he had good numbers against them, so it was possible he would show up again, which he did. Both starting pitchers did all right. The game wound up being higher scoring because of some late runs. It was low scoring and fairly close for a while, even though the Mets were winning for basically the entire game. Whatever. All right, we move on to today. Look at this schedule here. There are a few teams that I do think are in bad situations, but the starting pitching matchup, like I said, I don't think I could do it, man. So Cleveland is in one of the worst spots. They are returning home from a road trip that took them to Milwaukee and New York, the Bronx, to the Yankees. So not the longest road trip, not really that long geographically, but a road trip nonetheless for 6 games. So they are returning home from a road trip, and they played yesterday. So kind of a negative spot for Cleveland, typically, even though you tend to want to look for like the longer road trips that last longer than that. This one is like kind of right on the borderline, but they are still in that spot. So they'll still be returning home, have home life to get back to, stuff to get back to. I did see a stat recently that came up by, I think some of the guys on Wager Talk were talking about how counterintuitively, when a team returns home from a road trip, they actually do worse if they have one day off there, because it's like they get settled in and they like take a break and then they're more unfocused than if they just continue playing baseball, which also that one seems a little bit weird to me, but I guess that is the truth over like a long span of time, at least in Major League Baseball. But either way, when you return home, I think it is a negative, just maybe, I guess, slightly more of a negative when you have that day off for whatever reason. Even though you'd seem like if in that day off, the players would get their affairs in order and whatever, and then be ready for baseball. But counterintuitively, that tends to not be the case. But Cleveland, they did play yesterday, so I don't think they're in a very good rest spot. Returning home from New York, not the longest travel, but still travel. Texas had the day off yesterday, and they are traveling from home, so they're starting a road trip with a little bit of momentum, maybe off of beating Pittsburgh to finish their home series that they just played. So Texas is in a positive spot. So I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking, all right, this is going to be a play on Texas, right? Because you got Cleveland in the negative return home spot. Texas, first game of a road trip, positive spot. Teams tend to be focused in that first game of a road trip, want to get that road trip off right. Nathan Eovaldi is pitching for Texas, and he's putting up surprisingly good numbers this year. I think he's a decent pitcher, but 3.76 ERA, 1.09 whip, good numbers, and then up against who is he facing again? Up against Cleveland here. Even though Cleveland can hit pretty well, in 43 at-bats, he holds them to a 186 average and 581 OPS. So I'm thinking, I'm definitely going to play Eovaldi here, right? But then I'm looking on the other side. Oh, God, it's Tanner Bibby, Cleveland's best pitcher probably. Their best starting pitcher, Bibby, is pitching. If it was like anybody else, I'd be going against Cleveland here, and we might still be getting a decent number to go against Cleveland here. But Bibby, 3.33 ERA, 1.08 whip. He's been, like I said, their best starting pitcher this season. And up against Texas, he also does have good numbers and a 61 at-bat sample size, holding them to a 197 average and 536 OPS. Very low numbers, very weak numbers. So what can you even do there? So I don't think you could really play the side, even though the situation seems like it would be calling for it. Cleveland only used 2 relief pitchers yesterday in relief of Gavin Williams, who didn't have a good start, but they wound up using Gillespie for 3 innings to finish the game. So Cleveland's bullpen is actually in a decent spot. So maybe the way to play this would be to play the under. And it does look like there is some significant money coming in on the under. So Cleveland is on the money line. They're down from minus 137 to minus 132. 92% of the tickets, 96% of the cash. So they are public. I don't know if that cash discrepancy is really right, that they do have more cash than tickets, because the line looks like it's going against them in the line movement. And Cleveland is public. So I would still lean to Texas just because of the situation, but the under, I think, might be the better way to play this, with Texas not having used their bullpen yesterday because they didn't play. Cleveland pretty much saved theirs, and their hitters could be a little bit sluggish on the return home, even though they are trying to bounce back from getting shut out by the Yankees, by Garrett Cole, I think. The total here has gone down from 7.5 to 7.5 juice to the under. 64% of the tickets on the over, because, of course, the public's going to play an over in a Texas-Cleveland game. Both teams with pretty good offenses. Cash percentage is 78% to the under, though. So do I actually want to play this on the fly? The under does actually look like a pretty decent move in this one, with both starting pitchers having good numbers against these opponents and it being a perceived offensive game. I do kind of like it. I kind of like the under in this one. I'm looking right now just to see if there's we can go under 7.5 at, you can still get under 7.5 minus 110 in this one. Man, it just seems a little bit dangerous, but I do kind of like that one. I'm going to stay off it, but man, that is close to being an underplay. All right. So yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to have no plays today, but still. Philadelphia, I think they're in a bad spot. They played yesterday against Atlanta. Big series. They're playing in Atlanta. Philly lost by 1 run. Close game yesterday. Big series. They're coming off that big series where they lost 2 out of 3 to the Braves. Philly, I believe, is still maintaining first place, however, in the NL East by a decent margin. 6 games now. Now, with no time off, they are having to go to Kansas City from Atlanta, I believe. Yeah, they're in Atlanta. Now they're going to Kansas City. Kind of a weird travel spot. Not a great travel spot there. Kansas City, they're just staying at home, and they didn't play yesterday. So they're just hanging around at home. They just beat the Angels, which I don't think they're going to be that hyped up about beating the Angels, really. I think that might just help continue their momentum because the Angels aren't very good. Kansas City's tied with Minnesota right now in second place in their division, 2 games back from Cleveland. So they are in the fight right now for sure. They're in the thick of it, battling for potential wild card, potentially could win the division still. So Kansas City has a lot to play for here. Philadelphia maybe a little bit less so with that padding, and maybe they'll pay a little bit less attention to Kansas City coming off that big series, or is Kansas City's not traveling like Philly is and had the rest day yesterday that Philly did not, and Kansas City is coming off a lesser series. So Kansas City is in the better travel spot, better rest spot, and could potentially be the more focused team here. So I do like all of that. Starting pitching matchup also looks like Kansas City has the better pitcher here. On Philadelphia, what did they use for their bullpen yesterday against Atlanta? They used only 2 relief pitchers. So they didn't really dip into their bullpen much after a decent start from Christopher Sanchez. Taijuan Walker is pitching for Philly, 5.69 ERA, 1.51 whip. Bad stats, really high ERA, really high whip. And against Kansas City, I believe he also does not have good numbers. They're hitting over 300 against him in 49 at-bats, 306 batting average, 755 OPS. So the OPS isn't that bad, but the batting average is bad. So then I'm looking, okay, Taijuan Walker is probably the worst starter in Philadelphia's rotation, right? Or one of the worst. They're in a bad spot. So I'm like, I'm jumping on Kansas City here. But then I look, Michael Wacha is pitching. So it's Walker against Wacha. Wacha. Wacha pitching for Kansas City. He's got decent stats on the season, 3.33 ERA, 1.20 whip even though he's a little bit older, kind of more of a control pitcher. He's been doing pretty decently. But then I look at his numbers against this good Philly offense, 65 at bats worth. They hit him to a 308 batting average and 1,014 OPS. So I'm like, I just can't do it, man. I can't do it. I can't play walk out here, even though it is a bad spot for Philly. Kansas City's up from minus 130 to minus 132, but it looks like they have 63% of the cash, or 63% of the tickets, and only 58% of the cash. So really, you're telling me, even though Kansas City looks like they moved up a little on the line, they're public against Philadelphia, even though Philadelphia is perceived as one of the better teams and may be the better team. They're one of the better teams in baseball. Kansas City's not bad, but I'm surprised that Kansas City is this public. I don't think it could just be based on Philly struggling a little bit recently. Maybe it's the starting pitching matchup. I don't know, but the cash percentage looks a little bit lower than the ticket percentage. So also not something I can do. Then we got Minnesota. They're returning home from a road trip, which took them to Texas and then out to the West Coast to San Diego. So they're in not a very good spot here, having to return back home from the West Coast. They did have yesterday off, but still it's, again, a return home spot where you tend to be a little bit distracted. But then I look, and St. Louis did play yesterday, finishing up a pretty big series against Milwaukee, especially considering St. Louis is in second place in the division, but they're 10 games back of Milwaukee now, and they're below 500. But is that going to put St. Louis in kind of a negative mindset now? I don't know. Are they going to be focused to try to get back to 500? I don't know. Are they going to be kind of defeated after losing to Milwaukee and being that far behind them now and thinking we don't have that much left to give here? I don't know. Because St. Louis, if they don't win this division, I mean, they're probably not going to make the playoffs, I would imagine. They used 3 relief pitchers yesterday, or they won. What am I saying? Why am I saying they lost? They won. Excuse me. They beat Milwaukee. I am so out of it. So they could be in a letdown spot, actually, because they got a good start from Mikolas against Freddie Peralta, who pitched decently as well, but Mikolas outpitched him a little bit, came down to the bullpens, and St. Louis won. But they did use some of their best relief pitchers, and Kittredge, Romero, and Helsley. Helsley, their best, their closer. So St. Louis, not in the best rest spot, used some of their best relievers yesterday and could be in a letdown, coming off a win over Milwaukee. Has less travel, I guess, having to just go up to Minnesota, or Minnesota's returning home from the road trip that took them out to San Diego. But Minnesota did have yesterday off. But St. Louis having played yesterday, that gives me hesitation. And then the fact that Andre Palante is going to be their starter today, that makes me not want to take St. Louis, even though he has been making deeper starts and he's been not pitching that horribly. He's been a serviceable starter at the very least, going deeper into games now. But he still has a 4.07 ERA and 1.32 whip, which isn't very good on the season. Against Minnesota, not much of a sample size. They are only 1 for 8 off him. So 125 batting average, no extra base hits, 2 walks, so 489 OPS. So not a whole lot to take away from that. We don't really know. But I just think the Palante just kind of struggles a little bit, so I don't love him. And then on the other side, Minnesota's got David Festa pitching. He's, of course, unseen by St. Louis's hitters. So that could give him a little bit of an edge because St. Louis has never seen him before. But I don't know if I trust Festa. He's got a 4.96 ERA, 1.32 whip. His 39.9 strikeout walk ratio is good, though. So he is still off to a decent rookie season. 32 2/3 innings pitched, 34 hits allowed. So the number of hits allowed is a little bit high. Strikeout walk ratio is good, though, and the strikeout rate is good. And he does have a 2.03 ERA in 3 starts this month, allowing 0, 1, and 2 earned runs in those last 2 against Cleveland and Texas, but short-ish starts in all 3. And the Cubs was the first one of those 3. 5, 3 1/3, and 5 innings in those 3 starts. So not going that deep, but an 18-5 strikeout walk ratio and 13 1/3 innings pitched, only 11 hits allowed. So he has been pitching decently. So again, I think Minnesota actually has the starting pitching edge slightly here. So that's just something I can't do because I think they're in the worst travel spot and situational spot, kind of. But St. Louis having played yesterday and gotten a big win and having the worst of those 2 starting pitchers, I just can't do it. Minnesota looks like they're up from minus 135 to minus 140. 71% of tickets on them, but 74% of the cash. So, of course, they're the team with the better record. They're going to be public, but it looks like the lines moved up on them and they have the cash discrepancy a little bit. So, again, not something I want to do. And then finally, Seattle is in a bad spot. They are on a return home spot from a long road trip that took them out to Detroit, Pittsburgh, so pretty far east, and then coming back to the West Coast, but south, going to Southern California and facing the Dodgers and getting swept in that series. And it is a series you get emotionally up for at the very least. It was a horrendous road trip for Seattle, where they only won one game. They went 1-8, I think, winning just one of the games against Pittsburgh, and that's it. But a lot of the recreational bettors tend to think, oh, well, when a team has a bad road trip, they return home, they tend to like bounce back now that they're at home, right? Not the case in the first game back. Like I said, it tends to still be a distracted spot. And even if the team did have a bad road trip, it does still tend to be a negative spot. They're facing a San Francisco team that's kind of mediocre, I would say. San Francisco just above 500. Seattle, after that tough stretch on a road trip, they've fallen to 500. So maybe they will be a little bit focused just because of that, because they want to get back above 500. But man, brutal road trip, brutal amount of travel. And I just don't think they're going to be in that great a spot here. It's going to be a distracted spot when you've had that much time off and you have home affairs to get back to. And Seattle with the day off yesterday. I remember what I just said, that day off tends to actually affect the team even more. So Seattle is definitely in a negative here, negative spot. San Francisco also had yesterday off. I think they're in a more positive spot because they are starting a road trip, coming off a loss to the White Sox, which is kind of embarrassing. They won the series, but lost the last game to the White Sox. So I think it would be good for them to get out on the road, and they didn't play yesterday, so they get to just kind of forget about that. So a positive spot. So it looks like a spot where you want to play San Francisco, but starting pitcher for them, Hayden Birdsong. He's a rookie, only 22, but 5.01 ERA, 1.38 whip. Not anything that I really want to get involved in. And he's been much worse in the month of August, too, with a 10.64 ERA this month, facing not the best offenses either. Washington, Detroit, and Oakland. He's allowed more earned runs than innings pitched, as I just mentioned, with the ERA. 11-7 strikeout walk ratio is not very good either. So he's struggling right now. Bad stats on the overall season, too, but really bad stats this month. Not something I want to get involved in, even though Seattle has never seen him before. So he could have a little bit of an advantage for that reason because they haven't seen him before, but it doesn't seem to have really been helping him this month. I don't think these teams he's faced this month were really familiar with him either, and he's not been pitching well. So he's the worst of these two pitchers, so that's a problem. So even though the spot is really a negative for Seattle and a much more of a positive for San Francisco, the starting pitching matchup is just awful for this man. Luis Castillo is pitching for Seattle. He is clearly the better of these two pitchers and the much more proven pitcher. 3.51 ERA, 1.17 whip this season. He's been good on the season. Although San Francisco does have good offensive numbers off him. Only 5 of their hitters have seen it before, but they're 7 for 25 off him, a 280 batting average, a couple of extra base hits in the mix there and some walks for an 877 OPS. So Castillo doesn't have the best stats against San Francisco. So you could look at that aspect of it and say, well, matchup dependent. Birdsong hasn't been seen before by Seattle. Castillo doesn't have good numbers specifically against San Francisco. So for that reason, maybe that would put you over the hump to play in San Francisco. But then you look at the market, and the market looks like it's on Seattle. So I just can't do it. I don't know how the market is this heavily on a team in this negative a spot, but I guess it has to do with the pitching matchup and not really caring. I guess that Castillo has bad numbers against San Francisco. I don't know, but Seattle's up from minus 147 to minus 152. Seattle's got 71% of the tickets, but only 50% of the cash. So even though the line is moved up on them a little bit, the market is signaling against them, it's conflicting because the line is moved up on Seattle, but the cash disparity is actually heavily against Seattle. So that's the indicator I look at more. So the market is actually indicating against Seattle. My mistake. Making a lot of mistakes this morning. I'm out of it. 71% of the tickets, but only 50% of the cash there on Seattle. But those are the games that I figured I'd break down, the more interesting situations at least, but I can't do it. Can't do anything there. And then we do have NFL preseason real quickly. Jaguars, Falcons. Jags are up from minus 4.5 to minus 7. But maybe, again, because we know like who the personnel are going to be now because the cash disparity is way against them. 54% of the tickets on Jacksonville, who people consider them to be the better team, but 80% of the tickets on the other side on Atlanta. And, Atlanta could surprise some people this year. I think Jacksonville's going to get back to being better as well, with Lawrence being healthier as well. So, but in this final preseason game, mega cash disparity on the side of the Falcons. So that is the way I would look there to take the additional points there on that one, but I'm not going to get involved there. Miami and Tampa. Tampa's flipped from +1.5 to -3. But again, as I say, with these preseason games, these lines have been out longer, and the line movement tends to have more to do with like knowing more about which players are going to actually be playing rather than anything else. So I tend to put more stock into the cash percentage than the line movement. Tampa has moved up to that 3-point favorite, but 73% of tickets on Miami. Public likes Miami. They like Tua. They like a high-scoring offense like that, even if their defense is questionable. But 89% of the 89% of the cash, also on Miami. So we do see some market indicators there with the cash discrepancy on Miami. And then 49ers and Raiders are also playing tonight. 49ers have flipped from +3.5 to -7 with juice. But, it looks like the cash disparity again is on the other side. 52% of the tickets somehow on the Raiders, even though you'd think the public would come in on the 49ers, who are the better team. But nope, 52% of the tickets on the Raiders, but 66% of the cash on the Raiders. Interesting. So the cash disparities are all going against where the line has moved. So maybe once the line moved, maybe more of the cash started pouring in on the better number. Who knows? But the cash disparities in those games are on Atlanta, Miami, and I almost said Oakland, but the Las Vegas Raiders in those three. So that's going to do it for me, man. I keep saying I'm going to put out this college football video week 0. I'm only going to talk about 3 games, and I already gave you the fact that I have a play on Georgia Tech. You can still get +10.5 on them right now, but for me to actually give you the analysis that puts me on it, like the reasons why I think it's a good play, probably I'll do it tonight or tomorrow morning before the games kick off. At this point, it doesn't look like it's going to fall below 10 at the very least, but you have the play already at least, so it'll just be more the breakdown. And I will talk about the SMU Nevada game and one of the other games that I find the line to be interesting at the very least. And I won't talk about the other 2 that are involving FCS teams. One of them I think is both FCS teams. So I'll talk about both FBS games. And then one of the FBS versus FCS teams has a little bit of an interesting thing going on there. It's going to do it, man. Have a good one. Peace.